and welcome to Photography Tips with Susan. I'm Susan Crutchfield. I'm the director of the Noonan Carnegie Library. I'm also a professional photographer of over 10 years, and I own Susan Crutchfield Photography. So today we're going to have another edition of Photography Tips with Susan, and today we'll be talking about lens choices. So I'm really excited about this one. I love talking about all the different lenses. So let's get started, and if you ever have any questions, you can ask me in the comments or send me an email at scrutchfield@cityofnoonan.org. Let's get started. I love talking about camera lenses. I'm super excited to get into this with you guys today. I'm going to try to stick to talking about camera lenses that aren't too expensive. We might touch on one or two that are more expensive, but I'm trying to keep this for more beginners. So if you're interested in more in-depth discussion about lenses, just let me know and I could do another one that's more advanced. But today we're going to go with the impression that everyone who's watching this is a beginner. So one of my favorite things about DSLR photography is how you can remove lenses and use different lenses to get different effects or different perspectives. That's what I really enjoy about photography. It just allows for a lot of creativity, and there might be a learning curve when you start figuring out what each lens will do, but it's just something that I find to be a really fun challenge, and I always enjoy it. Even though having a good camera body is very important, you want to have one that will take decent photos, I really do suggest investing more money in lenses than your camera body. As long as you get a body that will fit certain lenses, I really think that investing in lenses is more important than the body because of the variety of things you can do with the lenses. As long as you have a decent camera, you can do some really awesome things with your lens choice. So today we're going to be talking about two different types of lenses. First up, we're going to be talking about zoom lenses. So zoom lenses come in a variety and range of focal lengths. The advantage to zoom lenses is that you can stand in one place and get different closeness to your subject just by zooming in your lens. It also lets you switch your lenses less because your zoom gives you so much more freedom to do that. And one lens can be used as a whole suite of primes if you use prime lenses, which is what we'll talk about next. To me, zoom lenses work really well for sports and maybe wedding ceremonies. You can also use them for portraiture if you'd like, but I think sports and wedding ceremonies are the primary thing I use zoom lenses for. Next, we're going to talk about prime and fixed lenses. This is what I usually prefer to use, and the reason why is this is where you're kind of using your body as a zoom. You have to move around a lot because these lenses do not zoom in and out. They're fixed lenses, so they're one focal length for the whole time. You can't move it at all. The advantages to me is that I feel like I can use more creativity with them. It makes me think because I do have to move my feet to get in different positions. So you're kind of using your body as the zoom lens. But I prefer these because I feel like they look better to me. They're really sharp. They give you these beautiful buttery bokeh backgrounds. It's just a personal preference that I prefer these. And that's probably because I do a lot of portraiture, which these lenses are great for. You know, whether you're doing wedding photography, children's photography, or, you know, just taking pictures of your kids, I found that the prime fixed lenses work so well for that. Now, the disadvantage to it is you do have to change your lenses when you want to get different looks or different focal lengths. So it can be a lot where you have to quickly change out your lenses. Now, if I'm doing a wedding, I'll usually have two camera bodies and I have prime lenses on two of them, so I don't have to change as often. But just keep that in mind. If you're in a pressure situation where you have to do things quickly, maybe you don't want to use prime and fixed lenses. Primes often let you shoot at a faster aperture, and they can be a more reasonable cost if you buy the lower level ones. Of course, they do get really expensive as you move up, but I just really prefer prime and fixed lenses. The depth of field on those is just beautiful. You can use them in low light and they work really well because of the aperture. And like I said, they're very sharp, and I just prefer the look of prime lenses. They come in a variety of different millimeters and apertures, and when we talk about my favorite lenses, we'll get more specific on these different types of lenses. Let's talk real quick about lens filters. Now, lens filters are something that you put on your lens, and they can do several different things. First off, we'll talk about the polarization filter. This filter deepens blues and adds contrast to skies, and it can also reduce or remove reflections from water or windows. And it can also increase your contrast and saturation. So some people want to use this filter for those reasons. And then there's a neutral density filter, or ND, and the ND filter reduces or modifies colors and light getting through the lens. So it can really allow you to do some creative stuff, like slowing down your shutter speed. If you want to get some extra stops of light, it can help with that. They're wide aperture lenses in bright light without overexposing it, because sometimes when you're taking photos like that, you can't really get any more light coming in, so this is a great way to do this. It also allows a more shallow depth of field and selective focus when you're under lighting conditions that you can't really bring the shutter speed down any lower without causing too much blur. So ND filters work on stops of light just like the aperture. And there's many other filters, but these are the two most commonly used now. I actually don't use any filters on my camera. I used to, but I've kind of gotten away from that. I've gotten to the point in my career where I can pick the hours that I choose to shoot, so I'm not shooting like at high noon, which is where these filters can really come in handy. But it's something to look into. It allows some more creativity, so you may want to check out more on lens filters. So let's talk really quick about a couple of different additional things to know about lenses. If you have a crop sensor body, this will change the millimeter of your lens choice. So there's two different types of camera bodies: crop sensor bodies and full frame. So if you have a crop sensor body and you have a 50 millimeter lens on there, it's actually already cropping in the camera. So a 50 millimeter lens might be like an 85 millimeter for the final photo. So you know when you're taking the photo, it's going to be a little more cropped in than where it looks. So just keep that in mind. And also, some lenses that are made for crop sensor bodies won't fit on a full frame camera, or vice versa. If you buy a lens, depending on your camera brand, you'll have to check into that. And just keep that in mind when you're buying lenses. Make sure that the lens you're purchasing will fit on your camera. Also, lens distortion. On wider angle lenses, if you have something kind of on the edges, then it might distort them a little. It'll bend it and it won't look how it really looks in life. So just keep that in mind if you're using a zoom lens that's wide angle, or a prime lens that's wide angle. Just keep things away from the very edge of the frame so they won't come up all distorted. So now let's talk about some of my favorite lenses. I've brought some of them in today to talk about them. I haven't brought all the lenses I have. I just bought a few so I can show you what they look like. Let's start with the lens that's currently on my camera right now. This is a 50 millimeter lens. It is what we call in the biz a nifty 50. It's such a little workhorse. It is really what I have on my camera for a lot of different photo sessions for the majority of the time. I really love this lens. And it's a relatively inexpensive lens, so it's a great starter lens. I suggest everyone grab one of these. You can get them for $200 to $300, and they just work really well. So this is a 50 millimeter, and it goes down to 1.8. It gets a little soft when you get down in 1.8, so I usually don't lower it beneath a 2.8 aperture. So just keep that in mind. But I really love this lens. It forces me to move around and get really creative like we talked about earlier. So this one, I highly recommend you pick one of these up. I've also used the 50 millimeter 1.2, and that is a huge price difference of about $1,000. So it is beautiful though, it's super sharp, and so I recommend that one too if you have the money to spend on this. But this is a great starter lens, the 50 millimeter. Next up, let's talk about the 35 millimeter. I love this because it's a wide angle lens. It's also a prime fixed lens, but it's wide angle. So if I'm in a situation where I just need a little more of a wide angle, I'll pull out the 35 millimeter. It's pretty sharp. It's just nice if you're using a lot of prime lenses to have one that's 35 millimeters so that you can make sure that you have a good range. And the next one I want to talk about is my 85 millimeter. I love this lens. It is so dreamy in the background. It's a great portrait lens. I use it a lot on younger children, and it just really brings out the eyes, and I can just do the background when I'm on a lower aperture, just that beautiful bokeh that we all love. And I really love this one. It just is gorgeous and crisp and sharp. You do have to make sure at least on mine, you gotta hold it really still so you won't get any little blur, but I really love this lens. This is a great lens for me. But let's talk about my favorite lens in my bag, especially if you're doing something like wedding or sports. This is kind of a must-have lens. And next up, let's talk about my favorite lens in my kit bag, and this is the 70 to 200 millimeter lens. This is great if you're doing a wedding or sports, because this lens is terrific in low light. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And when you're taking photos, you can get really far away and you get the nice bokeh, even though this is a zoom lens. This is, I think, a must-have lens. It is a little more pricey than like the 50 millimeter, but this one I love. And the best thing about this lens is the compression that it has on it. So say you're photographing a wedding or a couple or kids or anything, and you're in a spot that maybe the background doesn't look so great, you can put this on, back up, and zoom in really far, and you'll see that it compresses whatever's in the background. It makes it blurry, gives it that bokeh, and then you can kind of hide where you are. So I've used this before on a lot of weddings when maybe the background wasn't so pretty. So this is really cool. I suggest you go online and read more about compression, because what this lens can do is really great. And another lens I recommend, I don't have it with me today, but is the 100 millimeter macro lens. I love this lens, especially if you're doing anything like you want to take pictures of flowers, or you're doing weddings and you want to take photos of the rings. It's a beautiful macro lens, which just basically means you can set up this really pretty scene and it will capture all those gorgeous details. For instance, I did a wedding a couple of years ago, and I went outside, I took the wedding rings out there, and it was in this beautiful, beautiful old mansion, and they had this floor that was just flagstone, really pretty, and I just put the rings there. I took some photos of the invitations, and it just is beautiful because it goes in there and it gets that beautiful detail in there. Because if you try to do that with a lot of other lenses, you just can't get that detail in there. So you need a macro lens for that. So those are the lens choices I wanted to talk about today. These are my favorite lenses, but there is a variety of different lenses you can choose from. Now, if you buy a camera that has a lens that comes with it, sometimes those are called kit lenses, and they might look like they have a really great range of motion, but they don't go very far on the aperture scale, and they're not really that great. So I would suggest you just purchase a body of a camera and don't get the kit lens that comes with it. I would get, especially if you're just starting out, buy the camera that you want, and then get at least the 50 millimeter lens, and then start working up depending on what you want to do with your photography. The lenses you buy will really depend on what type of photography you're doing or what you're looking to do with your photography. If you're just wanting to take pictures of your kids, I think, a 50 millimeter lens and maybe a 35 millimeter lens would be great. If you want to do more things like weddings or portraiture, I would suggest an 85 millimeter, definitely the 50 millimeter, and even the 70 to 200, because this lens does so much and it is a zoom lens. So it has a good focal range. But I really suggest you just do more research on lenses, decide what you want to do with your photography, and enjoy looking at lenses, because it's a lot of fun. I always enjoy researching, which one I'm gonna get next. So I hope you've enjoyed this talk. Thank you so much for joining us. Please let me know if you have any questions. Send me an email, or just put a message down here, or send us a message through Facebook, and we'll be glad to answer any questions you have. Thanks so much.